What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Other Guys on the Badlands Podcast Network. I'm Jake Chatsky, joined as always by Paul Kilgallen. It is the last week of the regular season. The Jets come away with a win against the New England Patriots. Paul, how you doing? How you feeling?
I'm glad it's over. Merciful end to a really, God, what a long season. I was sitting there watching that game today, and in some ways, it feels like it was, 3 days ago that I was, standing up screaming when Gibson was returning the punt at home against Buffalo in week one. And in other ways, it felt like this has dragged on for years and years, right? A tough one to endure, even tougher than it normally is in a lot of ways. So I'm just happy it's over and we can get into where we really flex our muscles in the off season here.
Yeah, ready to be back-to-back off-season champs. I agree. I think it's felt like a long road, with so much hype going into the season, obviously coming off the Aaron Rodgers signing, 4 plays, the entire season changes. And ever since then, it's been kind of a roller coaster of emotions. The team was really good to start out. Team fell into the same old Jets territory that we've seen time and time again. Got our hopes up for a stretch run, ended up losing 2 crucial games. And that was really when the wheels kind of came off. And then it was, are we going to end up with a top 3 pick? And then the wheels kind of came off of that tanking scenario. And so we've found ourselves somewhere in no man's land, somewhere in the middle. But we'll get into a lot of the offseason stuff, and we're going to do a little bit of a summary about the Jets season as a whole today. But before we do that, let's talk a little bit about today's game. The Jets beat New England Patriots in Foxborough in what is potentially Bill Belichick's last game as a head coach. I've been pretty open on this podcast about, being pro tanking essentially once it becomes clear that you're not going to be in the playoffs, and understanding that, the more games you lose, the higher draft capital you have, the more you can use that as a trade chip going forward. All that being said, past episodes of me saying all that stuff, it's so nice to win one. And it's really nice to do it in Foxborough against the evil man. And yeah, could this come back to haunt us down the line? Sure. Could I be regretting what I'm saying right now on a draft season pod down the line? Absolutely. But all that being said, we haven't seen a win against the Patriots in what was it? It was 16 games in a row, 15 games in a row. So it was an ugly one. Breece Hall is an alien. And it's just nice, especially if that is the lasting memory that, it could have turned worse, sure, but seeing that look of Bill just covered in snow, uncomfortable, having to deal with his shitty Patriots team, felt nice to kick him on the way out. What did you think after watching that game?
Yeah, I mean, it feels good to win, man. It's like you said, 16 straight, 8 years. And then I think a regular season win in Foxborough has been even longer than that. I think we were pushing over 15 years on that one. It just feels good to win, and it's one thing to talk in theory about it's nice to get better draft picks, but at the end of the day, when you're a fan and you're watching your team on television, however intently you're watching, it's fun to win, right? And end of the day, if that game flips the other way around, the Patriots basically slide from 3 to 5, and we potentially go from 10 to 6 or 7. So it actually had a bigger effect on us than it did on them. End of the day, that scenario that you put forth on the podcast a few weeks ago, didn't really come to pass, right? Because they're still not in that top 2 range. Now, if their guy is Penix or somebody else, then they're still going to potentially have the opportunity to get that guy if the draft goes the way everybody expects it to go, with the 2 quarterbacks going off 1 and 2. But we'll see. I mean, it was fun to see him walking off the field, covering his face, clearly uncomfortable. He kind of blew Salah off, which was weird. He gave Rodgers a little bit more time, and then it was just surrounded by security, covering his face, walking off the field. And I like to imagine that he was crying a little bit underneath the towel there, and hiding
He's
his
an
face.
emotional
And then,
guy.
oh yeah, and then in perfect I don't know if you saw Belichick's post game, but it was just perfect. It was just perfect. It was like they kept asking him questions about, do you expect to be back here last year? And they asked him every single possible way you could think to imagine that question. And he just kept being like, prepared all week to beat the Jets, and we didn't beat the Jets, so I'm disappointed. Just over and over and over again. So it's just perfect. It's perfect the way it played out. And um, look, I mean, it sucks that we're not in that 6-7 range because we're potentially getting a guy that we really want there, and we'll probably get a guy that we're all going to be happy with at 10 too. But I think really, like, when you look at the season, yeah, we dropped those two to Oakland or Vegas. I'm sorry, and I was going to say Oakland and San Diego, but I'll say Vegas and Los Angeles. We probably should have won those two games, but maybe we shouldn't have won the Philly game, and we probably stole the first Buffalo game also. So at the end of the day, like, water finds its own level. We got to the spot we were supposed to be at. We're a 7-10 team. We are not, we're not like a top 5 drafting team talent wise. We're also not as good as we thought we were talent wise. But all things kind of shook out the way they did at the end, and here we are. Get ready for the draft.
It's time to get ready for the draft. But before we do that, and we'll have more in-depth dives into the draft later on in future episodes of this podcast, we wanted to take one last chance to take a look back at this season. And we thought the best way to do that was to go about handing out some individual awards to people on the team from this past season. A lot of this may not be, we're kind of using this as a framework to talk about various different players throughout the season. And so there may be some guys that it's like a personal thing of reason why we want to give them this award. It would be very easy to just name the 2 guys who got named to the Pro Bowl team for every single category and call it a day. But we wanted to talk about a bunch of different players on this team. And so we're going to do that. With that being said, the first award we wanted to talk about was the Defensive Player of the Year of the Jets from this past year. Obviously, the defense was the stronger side of the ball for the entirety of this season, and there's a lot of players who deserve some recognition. So, Paul, I'll let you go first. Who was your nominee for Defensive Player of the Year?
Yeah, I mean, there's only a couple to choose from. I don't want to step on your toes here, but to me, when it comes down to the couple of players that you would think this would go to, in terms of production, I'm going to go with Quincy just because of the volume that he was on the field for. Like, he's eating up a bulk of the snaps. He was all over the field. He was visible when you were watching games on television. He was flying all over the place, absolutely killing people. We had an episode earlier this season where we talked about that college highlight tape, and that's pretty much what we saw all year this year was him just flying around, laying vicious hits. Got a couple flags a couple times for probably hitting a little late or a little hard or whatever. But just in terms of what he was able to bring to the defense, like, he was able to get out and close off the perimeters. So, like, he was taking away elements of the opposing team's offensive on a week in, week out basis. And he was just so much fun to watch. And when you couple it with the quality of people that him and his brother are, it's hard for me to give it to anybody except Quincy. How about you?
Yeah, that's a great answer. And I think, both Williams brothers were studs this year. I think Quincy, especially, I'll talk about my feelings for Quincy in a later category. I don't want to provide too many spoilers, but the essentially just to say that the leap he took was astronomical this season, and a great one of the better things that Joe Douglas did was locking him up before this season to like a very reasonable 3-year extension that has already shown to be a value deal based on his play on the field this season. So I think that's an awesome pick for Defensive Player of the Year. Before I talk about my guy, I just want to say I'm kind of treating Sauce as like LeBron status for this award, where it's like, we know he's one of the best players on any defense in the NFL. And in theory, if the award was just best defensive player, which it is, but like in theory, if the MVP was just best basketball player, it would have gone to LeBron a bunch more times. But there's storylines and other factors that go into it. So I'm not going to give Sauce my Defensive Player of the Year award, even though he absolutely deserves to be an All-Pro again. And I'm not going to give mine to someone who, for you mentioned the volume that Quincy contributed. This guy, to no fault of his own, was not necessarily a volume player, but when he was on the field, he was absolutely every bit of a defensive player of the year, and that's Bryce Huff. And we've been banging the table for the entire year that this guy needs to get paid. He is a homegrown talent that they found off the heap in UDFA and has turned into a premier edge rusher. It would be an absolute travesty to let this guy walk. He was saying some stuff after the game about how he's not taking a hometown discount and he doesn't think the Jets basically have deserved one and that he's earned the right to make money with his play, and absolutely he has. And the Jets should be an organization that rewards that. He got 10 and a half sacks this year. You could see how happy the team was in a rotational role and limited playing time. The like advanced metrics about his, pass rush win rate are off the charts compared to other people in this league. And so I think for a guy who got limited playing time, who was really, a role on this defensive line and not asked to be like a premier pass rusher, like a Max Crosby or someone else in the AFC, like that's asked to just get after the passer every single down. His productivity was off the charts. And so that's why I'm giving him my defensive player of the year.
Yeah, awesome pick. And if you don't mind, I want to dig into that contract thing just for like 2 minutes here. So, they've kind of taken this approach with him that a lot of, I'll say us, Jets fans, have been screaming to extend Bryce Huff for a very long time, right? Like it was obvious to a lot of people what he was. And, they kind of did a similar blueprint last year with Quincy Williams, where they had a veteran on the roster who was kind of in that similar role. They worked Quincy into the role slowly, right? Then they let the veteran walk, and they get Quincy on what at this point looks like a bargain. In the offseason, I think a lot of people were like, wow, you're giving Quincy Williams that much money? That's kind of a lot. But at this point, it looks like a bargain. So now we're in kind of a similar blueprint here where I think the Jets were maybe thinking, hey, now we let Carl Lawson off the books and we're going to keep the guy that we developed, right? And we're going to extend him and we're going to get a bargain. Problem is, you're not getting a bargain anymore. He got too good too fast, and Lawson contributed zero this year. At least last year, Quan Alexander was playing. They were rotating. Him and Quincy were kind of going back and forth. There was some learning happening. Bryce Huff zoomed past Carl Lawson this year, and he was left in the dust, and he wasn't even active on game days anymore. So I think I see what they were getting at and what they were hoping to do with him. Problem is the ship has sailed. And so, now you just got to pay him, right? And you're going to have to pay him market rate.
I saw him. He liked a tweet. I forget who it was. Sorry, I'm not giving you credit on here. But he liked a tweet where someone said Bryce Huff isn't taking a deal less than 17 million per year, and he liked that. And he was like, the guy quote tweeted, Bryce liking it. It was like, I guess I just set the market for him. And it's like, dude, if we can get Bryce for under 20 million a year, for that level of pass rusher, do that in a heartbeat. And
right.
So I think he's honestly going to command more on the open market. So if we're able to get him for a 17 mil number, Joe, get that done yesterday. That should be your first move now that you're for sure going to be brought back once the offseason signing period opens in March. Get that shit done. Let's move on to something with a few less options. Offensive player of the year. Not the best year for the offense. Aaron Rodgers was not nominated for this award, sadly, although many fans were hoping he would run away with it. Who you got for your offensive player of the year? I think we're going to have the same answer.
I'm going to go Randall Cobb. No, I'm
nice.
just kidding. No, I mean, there's only two choices here, right? So it's who do you want to talk about, right? I might as well just bring both out into the light and then we can both say a few words. On the solo one I did last year, I left a couple minutes at the end to just do some appreciation for both Brees and Garrett for not only what they've been able to do, but also what they've been able to endure under these circumstances. And I think there were many points throughout the season where I and other people were being critical of these two guys for whatever reason, right? Whether it was turning your head upfield and taking your eyes off the ball and dropping a pass, or not coming down with a contested catch, or maybe being a little loose with the ball when you're carrying it. There was a few different reasons floating around, right? But then the season ends, we get through this traumatic 18 weeks where it felt like nothing good happened, and you take a step back and you're like, Brees had 1,000 yards rushing. He had 1,500 all-purpose yards. Garrett had 1,000 yards receiving. Like, how? How did it happen? The offense never did anything, and it just speaks to how good these two guys both are. And not only that, and we said it about Quincy Williams also, but like the people they both are, like I think they both edge a little bit into the territory where they make people nervous with some of the words that they say, right? In terms of like, Garrett Wilson said something last week about like, oh, you don't know what the future holds in terms of does he want to be here a long time and et cetera, et cetera. But like, we don't need to worry about that stuff. For what these guys have endured, it's what they haven't said that I think impresses me more than anything else. And yeah, I mean, we are so lucky to have these two guys, and please God, make better use of them next year. Please God, have an offensive coordinator that doesn't realize Brees Hall can catch footballs in week 17. Like,
Unbelievable.
please figure out a way to use these two.
Yeah. I mean, they're both aliens. I think, the my heart wants to give it to Brees solely because, the numbers he put up coming off a torn ACL when everyone knew the Jets couldn't throw the ball in most cases. And if you were watching the games, the reason that I think I'm giving the edge to Brees over Garrett is because there were so many games this year where the Jets could do nothing and Brees would just catch a check down and take it 50 yards and that would be it. And like that was the difference in a lot of these Jets games. And so like for Hackett to say that he found out he was a weapon in the pass game too late is unbelievable. Like if you've watched 1 second of Brees Hall footage, you should know that he put the offense time and time again on his back this year. Not enough where he could like defeat the majority of the NFL on his own. But I would say most of the Jets wins were put on the back of Brees Hall this season. But I do want to shout out Garrett only because like getting 1,000 yards with the rotating cast of quarterbacks he had to deal with is like, that's some crazy superstar shit. And the fact that we have both of them from the same draft class, both those guys should hopefully be here for a very long time. The clear only two answers for offensive player of the year. Moving on to our next category, which we decided to do rookie of the year. When we were coming up with these categories, I thought this was clear runaway Joe Tippmann. And Tippmann, was by far one of the best rookie standouts on the team this season, especially when you go back to like training camp and people being like, oh my God, he's taking third team reps to see like where he came from in year one. And especially, like I was one of the people like that was preaching take the floor of John Michael Schmitz. And, he didn't necessarily have the greatest rookie season compared to Tippmann. And so really like it seemed like a no brainer of rookie of the year. But you brought up one other name that we should talk about and didn't immediately come to my mind. So wanted to give you the floor to talk a little bit about the other guy we got up here.
Yeah, Xavier Gipson. I mean, I think we like probably it's best to like measure this a little bit because Saleh seems to like really, really love Xavier Gipson, and I think part of that is probably like the stuff that we don't see, the work ethic, the quality of the person that, for a guy who we don't get exposed to as much as we do with Quincy and Brees and Garrett, right? We can see it with them, but we don't see or hear from Xavier Gipson that much. But I mean, again, you zoom out at the end, he took the punt return job from a guy that they pretty much signed to return punts. He took the punt return job from him straight out of camp. I think he was the third leader on the team in touchdowns with 2, which is not like, let's not overstate that, right? Like nobody scored. It was basically Brees and Garrett and then everybody else, but nobody else had 2, right? He was alone in that area. He definitely struggled. He had like a few periods where he looked nervous catching punts. He had a couple games where he was probably taking fair catches that he shouldn't have. He was fielding punts inside of the 10-yard line that he shouldn't have. And if we go all the way back to the Hall of Fame game at the beginning of the preseason, he dropped the first punt that he fielded in Cleveland in that game. And I actually texted my friends right after that, and I was like, well, that guy's cut, right? And then he goes, and I think we mentioned that earlier this season after he returned the punt week 1. But again, like you zoom out at the end of it all, and what this guy basically did is work himself into a special teams contributor role as well as a spot on the offense. Like he got a bunch of balls today, and like Lazard was deactivated. He was a healthy scratch. And so he has worked his way into an admittedly thin wide receiving core, but he's worked his way onto the field as an undrafted guy coming out of Stephen F. Austin, I want to say, is where he went to school. I'm not positive